Hey guys, JT Shaver here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Godox FV200 LED light. If you want to find out how bright this light is, how much noise the fan makes, and just what makes this light so special, keep watching. The Godox FV200 is a hybrid continuous and flash LED that can be used for both video and flash photography. Right now this light goes for about $450, and there is a 150 watt version that goes for about $350, so it's about 125 bucks more expensive than the SL150W, which is a continuous light only. I'm definitely a gear hoarder, and I have something like 10 different continuous or strobe lights, so the thought of being able to combine two into one successfully is really interesting. So if it works as good in real life as it does in my mind, I might be able to get rid of two lights and replace them with one. So as the name implies, this is a 200 watt continuous LED light, but what's cool about this is that it also has a flash mode, which is exactly one stop brighter in flash mode. So instead of a traditional strobe that has a separate modeling lamp and a flash bulb, this only has one LED chip, and to use flash mode, it'll overcharge the LED for a split second whenever you take a picture. Now, there's two main things that I wanted to find out about this light. Godox is kind of notorious for not having the quietest fans, and I've been using an SL150W for all my videos, and that light's kind of on the border for being too loud, so I wanted to compare it to this one and see if it's any better. The second thing that I wanted to see most was just how bright the flash is. I was pretty sure it would work for an indoor studio light, but I wanted to test it out in the sun, so I'll be doing that later in this video. So let's start with some of the positive things about the FV200 in continuous light mode. The first thing is that it's just very bright. It's exactly one stop brighter than my SL150W, which is to be expected, and you can adjust the brightness in increments of just 1% anywhere from 0 to 100. Secondly, the color quality on this light is great. It's just as good as any other Godox light, and I don't have the instruments to technically measure the color quality, but there are people out there that have the equipment to test the light quality from a technical standpoint, and these lights are just as good or better than lights that cost 2 or 3 times as much. The third thing that I like about this light is the build quality. So if the SL series lights are kind of an average or above average build quality, this one I would say would be above average to great or even better. To add on to that, the mounting bracket on this is just way stronger than the SL series. So on my SL150W, if I have a big and heavy modifier on it, I really have to crank it down to lock it to keep it from sagging. The locking mechanism on this light is just a little bit better, and I don't have to crank it quite as hard, and it just doesn't sag as easily, which is nice. The fourth thing is just how easy this light is to use, and Godox has always been pretty good about that. All the buttons are really obvious, and it's really intuitive to use, and there's really nothing that I would change about this light, at least in continuous mode. The last thing about this light that I like is that it has built-in special effects, and I know that doesn't really matter to a lot of people, but it's just nice to have that capability in case you need it. So you can simulate things like lightning, TV flashing, or flickering light bulbs, and it's all just built into the unit. There's really only one negative thing I can say about this light, in continuous mode at least, and that has to do with, you guessed it, the fan noise. Now, it's not horrible, but this is everyone's biggest complaint with Godox, and I'm not sure why they don't just spend a few more dollars and put a much quieter fan in. I'd happily pay $20 or $30 more for a nearly silent unit, and their cost would be just a fraction of that. Now I know they have to move a certain amount of air to keep these higher wattage lights cool, but I just refuse to believe that they can't make it a little bit quieter. Now because this light is brighter, you can turn it down and use it at something like 50% instead of 80%, and the fan will slow down a bit and it will be quieter. You could also move it back farther away from your subject so the fan noise is farther from your mic, but you have to keep in mind that if you move it farther back, the perceived light source gets smaller and so your shadows get harsher. With that said, I've never had a problem using my SL150W for videos like this, and if anything, this fan noise just has sound in a different frequency. It's not really quieter or louder, but my SL150W has kind of a rattly noise, and this fan is just much smoother sounding, so if anything, it just kind of blends into the background. I'm going to play a couple clips from each light back to back so you can hear the difference in sound, so turn your volume up now. Now let's take a look at this light from the strobe perspective, which is kind of what intrigued me in the first place. What's probably my favorite thing about this light in flash mode is that you can still use the LED as a modeling lamp anywhere from 5% to 100%. Now, this is so much brighter than any other modeling lamps that I've used and just makes it easier to see your lighting as you go. It also makes things like filming behind the scenes footage a little easier because it is so bright. One more small thing is that you can turn the modeling light up or down and increase or decrease the size of people's pupils, which is a big deal to some people. The other thing I like is that it has built-in wireless receiver, so all you need is one Godox trigger. That's just nice because I hate carrying around or storing extra stuff, so the fact that you don't have to have a separate receiver is just nice. Another important feature that the FV200 has is that it supports high-speed sync up to 1/8000th of a second. So if you have a Godox trigger, you just turn it to high-speed sync mode and adjust your shutter speed, and the flash icon will change to have an H next to it to let you know that you're in high-speed sync. The last thing I like about this light in flash mode is that the flash is actually bright enough to be used for most cases. To get a better idea of this light's general brightness, I tested it with the stock reflector as well as a 36-inch double diffusion softbox. I also compared it to a Canon 600EX RT speedlight. I did all these tests at ISO 100 at 4 feet because I think that's kind of a more regular working distance than the typical 1 meter measurement. So with the stock reflector on at 4 feet and ISO 100, I got f11 at 1/60th of a second, which is the equivalent of f5.6 at 1/250th of a second. So to me, these are pretty respectable numbers for a non-dedicated flash, and if you're willing to shoot in ISO 200 or 400, you really have a lot of flexibility. So I think the more important measurements are going to be using this flash with a big diffuser, but first let's compare those numbers to the Canon 600EX RT speedlight. Now, since the FV200 can't be zoomed in like a speedlight, I'm going to be using this at 20mm zoom and we'll test it from there. So the Canon 600EX RT at 20mm zoom gives me f16 at 1/60th of a second, and that's the equivalent of f8 at 1/250th of a second. So the 600EX RT is exactly one stop brighter than the Godox FV200, and that's not too bad considering the speedlight costs just $50 less than this light. Now let's take a look at what's probably the most important setup with this light, which is with a 36-inch softbox with 2 layers of diffusion. With that setup, I get f4 at 1/60th of a second at ISO 100 and again at 4 feet, which is the equivalent of f2 at 1/250th of a second. Just for comparison, that would be f2.8 at 1/250th of a second at ISO 200. So at 4 feet, I don't think these numbers are too bad. So for example, if you want to kill all the ambient light in the room, you need your flash to be 3 to 4 stops brighter than the ambient light in the room. So for comparison, typical ambient light in a room is f2.8 at 1/60th of a second at ISO 1600. And that's 5 stops darker than my setup with a 36-inch double diffuse softbox, so that gives you a wiggle room of about 1 to 2 full stops. And again, that's if you're shooting at normal sync speeds, and this light also supports high-speed sync, which we'll take a look at in a little bit. If you're shooting in a more legitimate studio, or you can just close your curtains or something like that, you can get your ambient light even lower, and that just gives you more flexibility with this light as a flash. And again, if you have a Godox trigger and you use this in high-speed sync mode, you can shoot at higher shutter speeds at f11 or even higher. So as an indoor studio use strobe, I'd have no problem recommending this light, especially if you only want to get one and you don't want to get 2 separate lights. Obviously, a lot of this has to do with your setup and how you plan to use the light, so I hope these reference numbers help you make a decision. Now, when it comes to outdoor use, if you're not familiar with the sunny 16 rule, it just basically says that outdoors on a full bright sunny day, your exposure is going to be proper at 1/125th of a second, ISO 100, and f16. Based on my testing indoors, I already know this light is not going to brute force overpower the sun, so I wanted to see how the high-speed sync worked outside in full sunlight. I was a little short on models at the time, so here's a photo that my 7-year-old daughter took of me with just the sun and no additional lights. I do want to mention that I did accidentally leave the softbox in place for this photo, so it's acting like a fill card, but you can see how dark the shadows are in my eyes, even with that extra light. Now, in a pinch, you can make something like this work with a lot of post-processing, but I would consider this a below-average photo, at least as far as the lighting goes. The settings for this picture were ISO 400, f2.8, and 1/8000th of a second. Now here's the same photo, but I added in the FV200 in a 36-inch octabox with just the front diffusion panel, and the front of the diffusion panel was about 3 feet away from me. This was shot with the same camera settings of ISO 400, f2.8, and 1/8000th of a second. Now, the sun was insanely bright when we took these, so it really was a worst case scenario. Compared to the stock reflector, the softbox is about 2 stops darker, plus you have to move your light back when you have a 3-foot deep softbox. So if you're using the stock reflector, you can really get the ambient light in full sunlight 2 or 3 stops underexposed. Obviously the problem with that is you're using a smaller light source, so you're going to get harsher shadows, and that's just not how most people want to use a flash outside. All in all, I think it's a pretty good flash that you could use in a pinch outdoors in bright sunlight, but it's definitely not a do-it-all flash. If you're shooting on a cloudy day or in the shade, you could definitely make this work as a flash as long as you're within 5 or 6 feet. Let's take a look at the other cons of this light in flash mode. One thing to keep in mind about this light is that there's no beep when the light recycles and it's ready to shoot again. This doesn't really bother me, and I usually turn that feature off, but just keep that in mind because some people rely on that during a shoot. Another small thing to keep in mind is that this light does not act as an optical slave, so you can't really use it with other speed lights and expect it to work like that. For me, this was a really good omission for this light to save a few dollars, so I don't think it's a big deal. Lastly, it is brighter as a flash than it is in continuous mode, but it's still not as bright as a dedicated strobe. So in almost every situation, you could use it indoors and it will work in really specific situations outside, but you can't really rely on it when you're going to be shooting in bright sunlight. So would I recommend this light for someone else? If it was for someone like me, the answer is definitely. The equivalent light, at least in brightness to this without all the flash features, would be the SL200W, and that light is only $90 less than this light. So if you can make this light work for most of your flash situations, you'll only be spending $90 more, but you'll actually be saving money because you don't have to buy another flash and have to deal with carrying that around and storing it when you're not using it. So that's it for now, guys. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up so other people can see it, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next video. I'll also have affiliate links to this light in the description if you plan to pick one up, and it doesn't cost you anything extra, but it does help me create more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.